Okay, so Mary Ellen, let me turn it over to you.
Sorry, Susan, do you just want to make an announcement that you're recording?
Yes, we're recording. Thank you. Yes.
Are we doing minutes too, voting of minutes, or is that happening after Mary Ellen?
I want to again get started because I think we have some people who have to drop off, so I was going to do the minutes at the end.
So I am just pulling up the agenda item. Somebody can tell me what's first. What are the order of the agenda? I'm just still getting myself organized here. What's the first item on the agenda, please? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm talking.
Sorry, I'm on. No, I was on mute. It's okay.
Sorry, FY21 budget and town school partnership updates, and then
Thanks, Robin.
service update is underneath that.
Thanks.
Yes, so the school committee received a report last week at their meeting. We're anticipating town meeting will be authorizing an additional appropriation of 1.7 million. It still leaves us with a projected deficit of around 1.3, 1.4 million as of the end of the first quarter. We are still hiring people, and so that amount will change going forward. And I believe at this meeting we were going to discuss sort of any specific questions that subcommittee members had with regards to that report, next steps. We also discussed freezing the operating budget as well, and we can talk a little bit about how that will be rolled out over the next week or so. I leave it for questions for the committee at this point.
Yeah, it may be worth just kind of going over the highlights of that, because I think we have some people who are town meeting members and who are advisory committee members who may or may not have been on that at that meeting. And I think the other thing that we were going to talk about was what are mitigation strategies if for the remaining balance.
All right. Robin, can I share my screen? Because it may be easier to just go through the slides I went through at school committee. Let's just do this. Okay, can everybody see my slides? It should say FY21 update. Okay, great. So these are the slides presented to the school committee last week. And what we did was we outlined the revenue and change since the June town meeting, some budget changes in drivers, as well as deficit and our plans for balancing the budget. So between now and the official end of the first quarter, or sorry, since June to the official end of the first quarter in September, we had two revenue changes. One was the circuit breaker, and the other was the carryover balance of the materials fee account. The materials fee is our employees of the town of Brookline who send their children to Brookline schools. And in closing the fiscal year 20 budget and balancing that deficit, I took the opportunity to not use all the funds because I knew we would need it for 21. And so because our annual tuition projection is really around 505 and the account had been set at over 700,000 for a number of years, we would need those funds. Circuit breaker has a new reimbursement. We weren't sure whether transportation was going to be fully funded or even partially funded this year. So transportation reimbursement for circuit breaker is now part of circuit breaker, and for special ed students as part of their total student costs. So we had an increase from our circuit breaker budget item of 167. So we had additional revenue of $450,000 coming into the end of the first quarter. We've distributed that $450,000 essentially to personnel. We've made some changes out of contracted services and sort of rebalanced a couple of different budgets. The budget managers have done that, but essentially all of that 450 goes to our salary lines. The next change we're anticipating is the town meeting's appropriation of $1.7 million. That is all will go to our personnel and salary lines as well, leaving our sort of new budget line all in with all offsets of $123,675, and showing sort of the new redistribution of our budget in our 6 categories. Revenue we've been able to pull together is about $2.2 million through circuit breaker tuition and the tuition rollover balance and town meeting, but we're still looking at approximately $1.3 million, and this is kind of how it all sort of plays out. The 2.8 or a net after town meeting of $1 million deficit is due to additional hiring for the RLA, special education, help desk, where we've actually needed to add to our help desk for our service desk for parent and student supports, more so than we've had to in the past. We've had an expansion of our curriculum software licenses. We've provided, Mike D'Onofrio provided a special education tuition assessment and report, and we're in balance for our tuitions projected for this year, so that is a good sign. Transportation, we're in balance, and the only other one for the second quarter I've asked Mike D'Onofrio to do is to do an assessment analysis around the contracted services. So this would be compensatory services, as well as additional services that we would be needing to provide this year. The RLA, we allocated them roughly about $200,000, $25,000 in sort of stipends and curriculum related stipends and mentors, and the contracted services software is partially the RLA. We've had to expand our licenses, $60,000 in supplies and $25,000 in equipment. We've had to expand the number of computers we've been able to purchase because we've added more staff, and laptops, and teachers and pairs both need laptops. So essentially our cost drivers have been opening a 9th elementary school, which is the Remote Learning Academy. We've had COVID-19 distancing to deal and added, which resulted in added core academic and specialist areas. Custodial services not funded by the rental of facilities revenue because we're not renting our facilities. IT personnel needed to help parents and employee needs. Software, as I mentioned before. In terms of our savings and efficiencies, one of the things we've done is we've converted roughly about $400,000 of our $900,000+ substitute account to dedicated daily subs for each building, so that we can mitigate some of the need for substitutes and actually hire somebody all year. We've reassigned specialists to core academic teaching positions, so people such as some of our literacy specialists, math specialists, our ed tech, some of our ECS staff have all been assigned to teaching grade level and core subject areas, and we have not backfilled those positions. And then, so in terms of the balancing plan right now, is that we need input from Finance Subcommittee at this point, is we're reviewing and currently going to freeze the future hiring. Really look at this point in the year, if we haven't hired them by now, why not? And if we don't need them, or we have other ways we can be using existing staff. We need to continue to do that. We need to continue identifying savings and efficiencies. And we will freeze the expense budgets probably the end of this month, November. I'm meeting with the secretarial staff, and likely the budget managers will also attend around purchasing and funding and where they are in their operating budgets. We'll, as always, continue pursuing funding. We always keep hearing that there's more money coming from the federal government or the state. We will continue to pursue those as they become identified and available. And then our last discussion item would be to sort of ask advisory for a reserve fund placeholder, similar to what we did last year, right now for about $1 million. And the reason it's that high is that we have virtually any flexibility I've had in the expense lines to freeze them, which basically balance the budgets from 18, 19, and 20. I don't have available due to the fact that our salary lines were not fully funded. Nowhere in this budget plan is any type of cost of living increase for, hold on a second, I got it. Nowhere in this budget is a cost of living increase contemplated or funded for BEU or non-aligned. The three AFSCME groups each had negotiated a cost of living increase as part of their contract, which was settled over a year ago. But there's no other salary adjustments for any of the other employee groups, any part of this estimate. But so with $1.3 million, with that potentially growing, it also has the potential for declining as we move through the year. I don't have the flexibility that I've had in the past operating budgets to help manage that down. November is the earliest in my entire 25-30-year career where I've had to call a budget freeze in November, because we really don't have those resources. And we need to fund the salaries that have been identified. So with that, that's where we kind of landed the end of this last school committee meeting on Thursday.
All right, thank you, Mary Ellen. So, this is great, thank you. So why don't we take questions from school committee members, and we could take questions from advisory committee members, and then anything from the audience. The one thing that I wanted to ask, because it was asked of me, I thought was a good question, was given that some of these, we're already in the middle of Q2, are there things that are going to essentially be savings because they've just been unfilled for Q1 and half of Q2? Or meaning, are we budgeting the full year amount, or have you already sort of discounted those, prorated them, I guess,
yeah,
for the rest of the year?
I've already taken those savings and discounted them, and with some risk, because my perspective may not be that of the person who would like to hire and replace that person. So we are managing. Stipends have been particularly dicey because the school committee had reduced the athletics and stipend accounts. And we have had people starting stipends that before we had them posted, and we've had a number. So I'm in the process of trying to, that's a piece that I have budgeted for that wasn't anticipating. So it would be something that I know is being filled, for example, in the queue that doesn't get filled. It was really where the savings would be. Everything else I've pretty much taken.
Okay. Okay.
If I could take it, I took it. It's
okay.
Some risk.
All right. So finance committee members, any questions? I know we've seen this before and talked about it before. I just want to check. Or other school committee members? Helen, I think you had your hand up.
Helen, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. I have two short questions. The 1.7 million on of COVID funding that we have to spend by December, is that included in those numbers that you were
No,
talking about?
no. No, that I had done a separate report early in September, early in October. I can bring that back at some point. Actually, probably should bring it back at our next meeting where we're going to land with that. No, we have the $1.7 million has paid for our reopening, literally all of our reopening, all the PPE, all the HEPA filters, all the plexiglass, everything and anything.
Have we used it all?
Yes.
So there's nothing left. We're not going to give anything back in December.
No.
Okay,
I
I
know
just
it's a
want to
good
make
point.
sure.
Yeah, no, it's
No,
a good
no.
point, Mary Ellen. We probably do have to include a slide on that for town meeting.
Yep.
But yeah, okay.
Okay, and
As well as the town's CARES funds as well. Those also expire in December. And so we're attempting to tap those as well. So the town's CARES funds have come forward to pay for the owls that were ordered. Town CARES fund has significantly supported food service to make sure food service is ending in balance. And the only problem, so we're not returning.
and we've used all of that, or we still have a little bit left there?
Justin is the one to ask that for. I know that we are using all of our school the funds
Well,
that
that's
are
what I'm
allocated to
asking.
us. Yes, we are spending all of our school allocated funds.
Yeah, we can only spend what we have. We can't spend theirs, unfortunately.
And I ask for more periodically just to see, just in case there's still like low hanging fruit and they've run out of things on their
ready to
side.
go on December 25th when they say, oh, we have 10,000 left over. Second thing.
Sorry, wait, just on that, Mary Ellen, I think it's probably important for you and Melissa to come up with a joint slide on that for town meeting, just because the town meeting doesn't really care if it's town or schools money. And my guess is they just want to know that it's all getting used. So if you can ask Justin, feel free to CC me or Cliff or anyone else, but just, we need one consolidated slide on that. And if there are a set of things that are outstanding, always, as Helen said, making sure that we always have more in case they deny some of it would be great. I think that's what we probably need to see as a consolidated page.
And then there are two pieces, just to finish out, there are two pieces of, which are smaller dollar values of, it's called CARES ESSER, ESSER, which is about 400,000 that we're sharing with the private schools. That expires in June. So that's covering the, some of the, special education evaluation services extra that we've had to do over the summer. It's covering some technology expenses. It's covering more sort of academics items. And the technology, which is $7,200, is available for sort of help and support, temporary help and support for Wi-Fi and hotspots for families. So not a lot of money, doesn't go very far, but that's also
good to have that also
June
together, all three sources.
Yep.
The second question, if I may, transportation. I remember the bus contract in the spring. We were very generous with the company because we were concerned they would lose their drivers. I don't remember what happened with their contract for the fall. I don't know if we need to get into that, but my question is, are we using less than what we had anticipated in transportation? And are there savings there?
There are potentially savings because of the number of days have been reduced for our yellow bus, both for Metco and for general education. Special education, we're still doing some calculations. We still have kids. We're still getting, there's some transition there. I will ask Matt and Evan to get a summary for me in terms of where they are and make sure that's included in the second quarter financial report. There's potential for savings, but I'm not quite sure how it's going to play out because special education, I'm not up to speed today on where special education transportation is. And that's been we've had huge unpredictable growth in that in the last few years, so I'm not quite sure where that stands. I have not heard. Usually would have heard by now. So I will have Matt and
Okay.
Evan produce a report for our second quarter report.
Thank you.
David?
Do these numbers reflect any private donations that have been received? My understanding is that some parents have been contributing funds or have at least been interested in committing funds toward the purchase of OWL cameras at the K-8 level.
No, we have not received, this does not reflect any donations, and we have not received any donations for owls.
Any donations in general for any purpose?
You would have those as part of school committee. All donations are required to come to school committee for acceptance. So no. I did have a conversation with a couple donors, and they were not willing to make their gift permanent or make their gift until the pilot they had heard about was completed and they had heard the benefits of it. So that's where those sat. And then now we have the 200,000 for 200 units, and don't necessarily have the need for those donations any longer.
Suzanne?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Susan, if someone on the finance committee is going to then support this and back up this budget request at town meeting. Are you going to do that perhaps, or?
Well, typically the superintendent presents the, typically the superintendent or the school committee chair presents the budget, but we could talk about that if you want. As to
Okay.
how that
Okay.
happens. Let me
Okay.
open it up to other questions. Anyone else want to? I know we have Carla, Cliff, anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Carla.
I have, I guess, just some information. The reserve fund started the fiscal year with $4.6 million in it. The current budget adjustment the town meeting will be voting on, that includes the additional funds for the school, takes $1 million out of the reserve fund for that purpose. So that leaves us with 3.6 million. We did vote, I think, 150,000 to make more ice at Lars Anderson so kids could go skating this winter if winter ever arrives. But just yesterday we received a budget amendment that, for, if I understand it correctly, would take another $1 million from the reserve fund and use it for support for Brookline's vulnerable populations, and would include allocations to the housing authority and to the food pantry. So that's important information, I think, for you to have in terms of your calculations about putting a hold or requesting a hold on reserve funds for this year, because that balance is declining. And we also have, advisory also knows that unless it's a highly unusual winter, there will be requests for reserve fund transfers for snow and ice and removal or treatment, and that we also expect other requests to be coming in related to COVID, particularly if the surge during the winter months is as severe as people expect it to be. So just to toss into, put on the table for you to consider as you make your calculations.
So I guess I'll speak for myself in terms of, my intention is taking the same approach I took last year, which is the school committee, school department still needs to balance their budget. And I would expect that $1 million request should and could be declining through the rest of the year as our deficit lowers. I just don't want to get into, I know, like last June, I mean, I was balancing down to the 11th hour, and literally 20 minutes, 30 minutes before the advisory meeting, didn't didn't need the last 100,000, but it wasn't unvoted and we still got it anyway. So it went to free cash, but I can imagine that this year is going to be the same nail biter all the way to the end, and declining through the year. I think it's a partnership in terms of making sure the town knows and understands that there's significant enough pressure this year that I don't know that I'm going to get it that close. I think I balanced the budget with $18,000, $118,000, 100 from the reserve fund and 18 from our budget. I don't think I'm going to get it that close again. So I appreciate the pressure that there is. And I also appreciate that the school committee needs to do, and school department staff and team needs to do everything it can to mitigate that deficit. But I just want to make sure it's on everybody's focus, everybody's attention.
Yeah, and I think part of what we got into last year, and this would be helpful just to get guidance, Carla, from you or Cliff or someone. I mean, we got into sort of the notion of like needing the funds, but not knowing until, as Mary Ellen said, sort of the last hour as to when, because I think she is still trying to harvest all those line items. And so no one wants to say we don't need it. I think the point is to say, this is the gap that she is managing and we may need up to this amount. So I think it's the same, as I understand it, Mary Ellen, it's sort of the same position we were in last year, which is that at the end, I mean, you'll do everything you can, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And if we can't manage it all, we will need additional funds. And so I guess it would just be helpful for us to hear from you how to do that, I guess, how to mechanically do that.
I don't have an answer for that. My thinking is that if the schools say we may need X number of dollars and the balance in the reserve fund is getting pretty low, and another department comes and says, we request a reserve fund transfer for firefighter overtime because we had X number of firefighters out due to COVID, you know, how do we, which bill do we pay? You know, how much money do we withhold? And I assume we probably hold on to a percentage, not the whole amount that the schools have asked us to put a hold on, but perhaps part of it. I really don't know, and certainly wouldn't want to speak now for advisory, but it's definitely a question that probably the entire advisory committee should take up, or at least the administration and finance subcommittee should take up good preparation for what may be coming our way.
I think, Carla, one of the things to think about is the next question is when you have firefighter, you have DPW, you have snowstorm, whatever it is, you've got schools. What are the mechanisms that the town operating budget lands in a deficit? So town meaning town and school, all departments as a total. What's then that plan, or what are the mechanisms in managing that? Because at some point, there could be a deficit that's uncontrollable out of everybody's hands, so to speak. So I think that's a good conversation to have. It's certainly a conversation I'm planning on having with Melissa periodically, because last year there was lots of different regulations and guidelines coming out from the Division of Local Services and the legislature doing some like forgiveness and planning and 3-year amortizing, kind of like lots of different conversations. It still should not relieve the pressure of the departments all departments to mitigate and manage their resources to the best of their abilities, to not have a deficit budget in any way. So, but I understand, like firefighters, you have additional overtime. I get that example, it makes perfect sense. We have a similar kind of thing with COVID and expansion, and if we could reduce, we would. So I think it's what happens if the town total operating budget is deficit. What is the management of that piece, and do we know what that is yet? We may not know that till April, May, or June, like we didn't last year.
The only thing I'm aware of is with snow and ice, or what used to be known as snow removal. The towns, cities and towns are allowed to pay that deficit. You're allowed to roll that negative forward for, I believe, 3 years. But that's, unless the state legislature allows cities and towns to go into deficit spending for other reasons,
Right.
we can't.
Right.
We can't.
Right.
Okay, Janet, go ahead.
You're
Janet, you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, usually when it comes down to that, and the only time I remember it was when we had the 100+ feet of snow or whatever it was, and Melissa tapped every available pot. It is up to her to do. I know that there's concern, and you should be aware, Susan, because you were participated in the meetings of town school partnership. There's real concern about next year. And so funds that we held in abeyance, and I questioned Melissa on this, where we had allocated but not spent a portion of monies devoted to retiree health benefits. They do plan to use it because we'll probably have to hit those funds next year. And so we're choosing among bad things. The problem with the reserve fund is we can't see ahead. Mary Ellen has a little bit more leeway to look at her budget and say, these are the places I have holes. As far as I understand it from Melissa, they fixed the holes with this budget amendment. They don't expect any others, which is why they're depositing those funds in the retiree health fund. But you never know. And some years there's money left, which in this case would help us get a head start on next year if it's supposed to be more brutal. But some years it comes down to, we touched every possible thing we could, and we want to avoid those rolling forward debts because they do have to be paid and the coming years don't look much better.
Okay, Carla, you had mentioned you had several questions, and I think we only got to one of yours. Did you have more? It's a good point, Janet. It's important to keep in mind. Carla, did you have any other questions? I'm not sure we got to all of yours. No, you're okay.
Good, thanks.
Okay, Helen?
One quick question. Has free cash been certified for this year? And how much is that? Or if not, when will it be?
Not to my knowledge. It could happen as early as November, but I don't know if it has happened. I mean, just bear in mind, though, that that's the basis for the CIP.
Oh, I'm aware of that. I'm fully aware of that, but I was just curious what magnitude, because it's gone from 5 million to 11 million, you know, in the times that I've looked at it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, it'd be important for the committee to keep an eye on that. The finance committee.
Okay, any other questions on this? Yeah,
there's a question in the chat about donations and funding sports.
Yep.
So I'd like to address that. So school committee is part of their budget reductions, unfunded for this year only, Intramurals. And then this summer, the elementary principals met and we discussed a number of after-school activities that would be suspended because of COVID. So we're still suspending many of these activities because of COVID and distancing. So we don't know that we really have capacity just in terms of the gym space. So between athletics and recreation, we don't actually, and school committee having to actually reopen our gyms for those two activities, we don't have space, activity, time in the day to actually add intramural sports or the capacity to do that. So I want to make sure, you know, we're not in a place yet to bring some of that stuff back. But I guess I want to at least make sure people know and understand that that was a one-year decision and it will come back as part of the budget request for 22 to refund and restore intramurals specifically. So I just want to make sure that's clear for people because I think there's been some confusion around intramurals and specifically.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we could tell people that, you know, whether it's a funding thing or whether it's a, even if there were money, we're not going to do it because of COVID sort of thing. I think that really
Right.
is the
So
question.
Intramurals is a good example where it was a funding issue, and then it was, and supported by a potential COVID issue, and now we have a COVID issue. So it just kind of hits all of them. But it is coming. The intention is for Intramurals to be back in fund, requested and funded as part of 22. That it's was a 1 year thing.
Right. And I think the question is, if there are parents who are willing to fundraise for it, is the answer yes,
No.
if we have the funding, we can give it to you, or is the answer no, it's not a funding issue for this year, it's a COVID issue for this year?
It's now a COVID issue for this year because we don't have the gym space. We don't have the capacity to run an intramural program.
Okay, I think that's helpful. The other question in the chat was about testing. We can probably just say it out loud, which was that there was an investigation as to how much testing would be for asymptomatic purposes. It was a pretty high number. It was in the $5 to $8 million range. And so at that point, the town administrator sort of suggested that we move on to other notions, which is where the current partnership is. I think there are some issues with the current partnership, specifically that what was promised, which is the less invasive nasal swab, is actually not what they're offering. They're offering the very invasive nasal swab, the one they call it the brain tickle. And so I think there are still some issues about that partnership that have to get worked out, but at any rate, that's where that one is. The conversation about asymptomatic surveillance testing is not really on the on the table right now. There are some other pilots that are popping up every day that we're always getting asked to consider and think about. So I don't think it's a no never sort of thing. It's just there has not yet been, after investigation, there's not yet been a proposal that's even in the ballpark. So somebody else can add to that if they want. Mara, I know you were part of some of those conversations. If anybody else wants to add anything on that one.
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Carla, Cliff, Janet? Okay, so maybe then what would be helpful is to just sort of, given the fact, Carla, just sort of given what you said about the other things in the queue for the reserve fund transfer question, what information, I guess it's sort of to you and Cliff, what information would be helpful about the 1 million? And at what point should we have that conversation with advisory? I guess it's Cliff as subcommittee chair, or you as vice chair, who schedules everything.
I don't think we want to put it on our agenda before town meeting, given that we're still dealing with loose ends for warrant articles. And quite frankly, I think at this point, and maybe Janet and Cliff want to chime in here, but I think in general, the advisory committee is about to go, we need a break. So I'm guessing that maybe early January, and certainly check in with Mike Sandman to see what he thinks. It may be also something that subcommittee chairs want to meet about before it goes to full advisory. I don't know. I have to talk to Mike about how to approach that. I don't know whether Janet want to chime in.
So I guess I might have thought differently. Given the request that's going to be coming and being discussed on Monday, the $1 million for, that we just found out about yesterday for the reserve fund, it would seem to me that it would be beneficial, not just for advisory, but frankly town meeting, to understand what are essentially known anticipated needs, because the reserve fund has, a limited amount of money. The administration has been hoping that there'd be some left in the reserve fund to be able to go into next year for free cash. And just to put things in perspective for everyone who's on the call who might not be aware, that the preliminary projection for fiscal 22 is a deficit ranging from minus 10 million to minus 16 million. So even with a very robust amount of free cash, there's some real holes that need to be filled. I think that town meeting needs to understand all the potential demands, because if there's another $1 million taken out of the reserve fund in a couple of weeks, you know, it really kind of changes the landscape in terms of being able to address the school's desire, which would be an additional $1 million on top of that, as well as our own overall budget needs for next year.
And I would just say again, the nature of the reserve fund is for those unanticipated, we don't know they're coming things. So advisory committee always wants to, as you experienced last year, as close as it was to the end of the year, we don't know what's going to happen next week. And next week could be a water main break that requires God knows what. It could be much more snow. I'm praying for a year like last year where we didn't have much of it and it was mild. But we just don't know. So making large commitments early on puts advisory in an uncomfortable position. And I agree with Cliff, it's town meeting that doesn't seem to understand that. I think that my sense of advisory is we want to work with and help the schools. We trust that the schools will keep their requests to what they absolutely can't manage on their own without bells and whistles and frills, to do the basic job, because that's all any municipal government is going to be able to do for the next several years, those basic services.
But at the same time, I think it's fair to recognize, as I think we've had to this entire year, the constantly shifting sand that the school committee is trying to, and the school department is trying to build its budget on, through really, I won't say no fault of their own, but there's so many things out of their control. And so from that perspective, what they're talking about really does come under the broad heading of unforeseen and unanticipated, because, you know, if you can't, you don't have the data to be able to actually do what you need to do, then everything becomes unanticipated. So I don't know that we want to wait until May. I just think this entire picture needs to be clarified as much as possible going into town meeting, because the school department's going to need to stand up and discuss its needs relative to, you know, some other requests that are going to be made. It's going, you know, this is going to be a very challenging town meeting, much like it was last spring.
I just would add to that I think there will be a debate among advisory committee members about how much of this is unanticipated. The pandemic, yes, was unanticipated and unforeseen, but we've already had a taste of what the impact is. And the specific amounts may be unforeseen, but impact is not unforeseen at this point. So I don't think it's cut and dry in terms of.
Well, that's no different than snow removal.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that I don't think there's necessarily going to be a unanimity going into from advisory looking at these requests as to what could be justified as unforeseen. That's all. And we probably shouldn't take up time at this meeting talking about it.
We'll do it Monday.
Right.
So do you want us then on Monday? Please, yeah.
Yeah, this needs to be brought up also on Monday in the context of the other conversation that's going to go on.
Correct.
So Cliff, I don't know, is this a full advisory committee meeting Monday, or is this a?
It is, and
it's
just been posted. As Cliff said, we didn't see this budget request until yesterday. And it will be in the supplemental mailing to town meeting members, but I don't believe the select board is going to meet to talk about it. So theoretically, this request would arrive on the floor of town meeting without any vetting by the select board or advisory. And that's why we scheduled an unusual Monday evening meeting to try and come up with some sort of approach. So
Susan,
Monday at 7:30, and it's just been posted.
And so Cliff,
Susan,
yeah, please.
I sent you the memo that we got yesterday from the petitioner, so you can have it and circulate it. I don't know if there's time to get a town school partnership meeting together to discuss this, but it's also something that we might want to consider.
Okay. Are you going to need information from Jim or Mary Ellen on Monday night? I mean, not docketed huge presentation or anything, but is it just, I'm just trying to follow on the logic extension of what you just said.
Well, I think that it will be maybe beneficial if someone were around just to chime in. I don't know that we want a huge presentation, but we certainly can summarize what Mary Ellen has presented today, which, you know, frankly, folks have already seen some of before, just to remind people and put things in context, to make sure that folks have, you know, maintain an overarching view of all needs, not just ones that are coming, you know, in and being the primary focus of that meeting.
You should know that part of the request is to fund internet access in public housing complexes because the community rooms in those complexes have been closed due to COVID. And it's believed that there are a significant number of people who simply can't afford to pay for their own internet access. So part of this money would be going to fund internet access, which would obviously benefit school students. So there is a tie-in to the schools.
There's also money allocated for the food pantry that is for Brookline students. So I'm curious to understand your perspective about that need relative to the things that we hear about, you know, families being fed. We don't, again, need to take up a lot of time today to talk about that, but those are the types of questions that people will have to understand the school committee's perspective on these specific line items in the memo that you just got.
Okay, I will send that through to the subcommittee and you guys can take a look at it right now.
Have you seen the amendment?
No, Cliff just sent it to me.
Okay.
So it seems to me, why don't we just spend, so let's kind of keep going with this, but just in the meantime, let me offer two thoughts. One is, I do think that when would this amendment get offered relative to, on town meeting, relative to Jim and Mary Ellen's presentation? I'm trying to understand like how this actually works.
That would be the moderator's call, but I think I'm guessing here, I think there will be comments from the chair of the advisory committee on the overall budget picture. There may be a representative from the select board doing the same thing. Where school department representatives fit into that picture, I don't know. Excuse me, but there's going to be, clearly somebody's going to set the table for looking at budget amendments. But this probably involves a quick email to Sandy.
Okay. Yeah, Jim, please. Are you?
I'm toying with getting in because just a little bit of the conversation in terms of the overview. I don't know school committee members whether the 2-page memo that I wrote last week provides that initial overview and whether that should be distributed because it sort of it tries to capture what's happened since the summer and what happened in the school department and how the monies were expended and how we get to the $1 million deficit, which Mary Ellen indicated was 1.3, as anticipating mitigating 0.3, and that the $1 million is really to say to the advisory committee that potentially if we keep tracking where we are potentially looking at $1 million deficit. But in the meantime, we are dedicating ourselves to mitigating that, to reducing that $1 million. Because there are unknown circumstances which may arise, I particularly worry about special education. But other than that, there may be other things that arise. So we can't say 100% this is how much we would mitigate it by, but we would be looking at that and reporting to the school committee month over month how we're shrinking that $1 million. So the $1 million is really to say to the advisory committee, we think that we're tracking in this direction. This is our business plan or our balance the budget plan to try to reduce that $1 million, to shrink it down as much as we can. I don't know that we'd be able to close it off, but we certainly are committed, which means that the school department is going to have to say no to some things. We're already going to be freezing stuff. And I think that's sort of the what Carla is implying, that it's up to the budget managers to manage that budget and to understand that we are in a situation which is it's almost triage at this point in terms of what is it that we don't have to purchase this year, even though it's going to address some of our initiatives. We are still at a point that if you look at next year, and if it's as dire as Cliff was referencing, it's going to be extremely painful. So it's in our best interest to put all of our minds together on the school side and to scrub the budget and scrub the budget and scrub the budget, and not be able to support all the things that we would like to support. So I would anticipate from January on, trying to keep morale up, trying to keep things as positive as possible. But as far as expending the budget goes, if it's not already committed, then we're going to have to do all we can to simply reduce spending. And that won't come easily, and it won't come without disappointment, and it won't come without people being concerned that COVID has been an unbelievable financial impact on the schools. You know that. And I think the schools, I have to say, I think the principals, I think the school committee support have done just an incredible job. That Remote Learning Academy has over 600, almost 700 students in there, and they're doing a great job. That comes at a cost. And the town has stepped up and has done unbelievable. We need to do our part to the extent that we can. We're going to need the support from everyone, because we're going to have to say no. But all my comments here are to say, I have a 2-page memo that may give an overview. It's sort of what's the story that happened here. And we can distribute that immediately if you think that's important, so they can read that. And then having conversations probably on the floor of town meeting, or maybe with the advisory committee to look at what has happened. I know people, some things happen that are out of your control. It feels that way a little bit now, but if we let it stay out of our control, we're going to be in real trouble come the spring. So I think we have to sort of buckle up and say that we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions beginning right now, actually. So that's what I wanted to say, Susan, but I didn't want to jump in.
That's perfect. Nope, that's perfect. So I think just a couple of thoughts. One is that it does seem to me, I know last time with school committee, we had talked about sending those slides, Mary Ellen, to advisory. I don't know if those ever got out through Suzanne or anything, but I think if they haven't, we should make sure that they do. The slides in the memo that Jim talked about. So let's make sure that that happens, because I think you're absolutely right, Jim.
Yep,
I think the second thing I'm hearing, okay, and the second thing I'm hearing is that it may be worthwhile just sort of being on, at least on standby or around on Monday night, either Jim or Mary Ellen, to answer questions if they come up at advisory. I mean, again, not a huge presentation, but I'm also mindful that there's sort of a lot that you guys are trying to sort out.
Yeah, we should both be there, Susan, excuse me,
Okay.
because Mary Ellen has the granular answers that I won't have.
Great.
Okay.
And then I think the third thought is it's probably worth, I'm not sure if we can get a town school partnership between now and town meeting, maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think just at the very least, it's important for Melissa, as we talked about earlier on some of the details, having a combined answer from Melissa and Mary Ellen on like the CARES funding and what's been allocated and what hasn't been allocated and sort of how that's been allocated, but also just sort of, you know, making sure that Mel and Melissa, I know you've been in contact with them all along, but they're as up to speed as they need to be on, you know, this set of documents and this kind of where this is landing in advance. And I think it would be good if we can ask to, if there is time for a town school partnership meeting, I think that it's, you know, even if it's just a half an hour to answer any questions, I think that's probably a good idea as well. So on that last one, Jim, I'm happy to email Mike, or if you want to email Mel, let me know and we can try to figure out if that's possible too. I mean, it would have to get posted pretty soon because it's already Thursday at 9 a.m., but and town meeting's Tuesday night. Jim, do you want me to pick that one up or do you want to email Mel?
I can email Mel. Do you want me to send him the memo as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, because regardless, I think you and Mel and Melissa and Mariella need to sit down, regardless of anything else, so that he and Melissa are fully up to speed, and then all the things that we talked about where there are those overlaps, that they're, you know, that they're ready for that. And then if possible, it'd be great to have a town school partnership, even if it's just a half an hour. I don't think it has to be a lot of production. It just has to be a check-in so people know.
Okay, I'll follow up on that as soon as this meeting ends.
Okay.
Quick question for me. Is there going to be an update on enrollments today, or is that something you can provide advisory with for its Monday meeting?
Well, the enrollment projections are also really difficult this year for, and it has to do with COVID, because our enrollments are down, and they're down because, for example, international students that we believe account for declining enrollment. And then there's another group of students who have left the system for a number of other reasons. So our enrollments are down, and we don't know whether they're down this year and projecting for next year, or are they down for a period of time, which would make a huge difference on our budget. And trying to develop the budget based on enrollments that we are just really uncertain about is, you know, it's pretty difficult right now. Our enrollments are down 1,000, 1,500 kids, something in that category. And yet we don't know what it's, so we have to make some projections. And do we make them on historic numbers, or do we make them on what we're seeing in the schools right now? We're gonna have to have a little bit of that discussion at the school committee table as well.
Thank you.
And class sizes necessarily are down as well. I think everybody knows that, but you know, with distancing, there are only so many kids you can fit into a classroom. And I think a lot of the educators are trying to do both and, you know, kind of in person and remote, but that's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And so that needs additional support as well. So I think, you know, everything that we normally try to do to, you know, manage enrollment through class sizes has all gotten blown up in a sense, and kind of is going in the other direction given the distancing requirement. So at any rate, yeah, David, please.
I was just going to add on this subject that in a prior discussion that I had with Jim and Aaron Cooley, we talked about what other districts are doing in terms of enrollment projections, and it seems that a fair number of them are ignoring this year because they see it as an aberration and are going to project off of previous numbers, because you obviously, for budgeting purposes, it would be safer to budget conservatively just in case a good chunk of that student population returns, between the international students as well as those who've enrolled in private school for maybe a year. So my guess is that's probably the direction we would want to go in, but obviously it's going to merit further discussion.
Yeah. If I could just add on to that just a little bit. The other concern that we have is, do we continue with the Remote Learning Academy, or do we assume that students can all return back to school in September? That's a huge unknown, and it's very costly. So, and yet if we assume the Remote Learning Academy goes away, but then it really doesn't go away, then we're in the same boat of not having budgeted sufficiently. And so Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns that we will be struggling with.
Yep. All righty. Thank you for that. I think that was agenda item number 1. Let's see. Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Still at food service.
Oh,
Sasha
sorry,
still needs.
that was
we
still
need to.
agenda item 1. Okay, go ahead.
I think
Go
so.
ahead. You're
I'm
still on
switching
one.
back to my laptop and finally rebooted itself. So Sasha is ready and can take over. Adult and community ed is not reporting out today. We still have some financial work and some work to do with them. They will need to be scheduled for your next meeting. So I'll be back shortly. Sasha.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Can I share my screen? Oh, yep, I can. So food service is back, and we're happy to announce or happy to say that the USDA has extended our the free meal waiver until the end of the school year. So for the remainder of the school year through June 2021, all students, regardless of whether or not they qualify for a free meal, can continue to access these meals free of cost. We have seen participation risen since we last looked at the meal program and what it is. Now that students are coming on in the hybrid model, we have seen some of those need for meals shifting to individual school sites. We have created many different access points in which students can access these free meals, along with the remote meals that we started in March and the mobile meal service that we also started. We have made it possible for students learning in hybrid model to access meals when they are, whether they're in school or out of school. And in creating this, we got a number of calls and emails about kids having access to the same meal. We wanted to make it equitable. Students who are eating on site or coming in school can have the same meal that students when they are not on site, the same meal as the kids in school, whether they're learning remotely or on their remote days. So we've created this chart to show how students can access these meals when they are learning remotely. So for for example, cohort A, when they're on site, those 2 days, Mondays and Tuesdays, they can access meal by pre-ordering from our menus and pick up those meals in schools. On days when they are learning remotely, they can still access items from the menu. It would need to be pre-ordered and picked up on their last day of school. So they would pick up their Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday's meal on Tuesday when they're leaving. And the reverse happens for cohort B, where when they're on site on Thursdays and Fridays, they still have access to the online menu, still have access to the same menu that their peers who are in school are accessing. Our remote sites continues. We still have the BHA properties that we service, as well as some individual school sites. And these sites have been serving over 1,000 meals per week. So that's something that we're happy about, that people are accessing these remote meal sites, and we've made it very convenient for them to access those meals. So for our budget for the first year, well, for my first year, I'm happy to say that we are not projecting a deficit, and this is mainly due to 2 things. Mainly due to the waiver that is allowing higher participation, and also the subsidy from the town's CARE Act, which is taking or covering a lot of our food costs, which has increased almost or approximately 4% this year. That amount is to over $225,000. Another way that we're able to do this is also closing 5 of our meal preparation kitchens and operating 5 central kitchens. So with that, we've reduced the number of managers that are needed and reduced the number of staff that would be spread out of, across those 5 kitchens. We've had coinciding, we've had 3 managers who retire, or senior managers who retire, 1 additional manager retire, or staff retire with the manager because of personal reasons. I think almost all of our staff are back. We have 28 positions that we've budgeted for, or 29 positions, including a driver that we've budgeted for. So most of our school food service staff who had been here last year are back, minus those that have either retired or resigned due to personal reasons, and those that took up positions as paraprofessionals. So the projected summary is a projected profit of just $2,783. Most of our spending, or most of our revenue, we expect to come from federal reimbursement, which is due to the waiver where all of our meals are reimbursed at the free rate. Along with food and personnel, which took up most of our budget this year, we are hoping that if this continues or nothing changes, then this should be constant, as all those positions are budgeted for based on our new operating model. With this year, I cannot express how thankful we are to the community, for one, for participating. When we sent out our first notification, I got so many emails saying thank you, and we want to support the school district, we want to support the food service program. And with that support, we have served over 75,000 meals since October, and we're hoping to reach 100,000 meals by Thanksgiving. And our food service staff is working hard to accomplish this 100,000 meal milestone. And with this, our lovely food service staff has decided that they are going to participate in that challenge, in getting people to come out and support and celebrate this hard work, that an accomplishment that they've made. So we have a group of volunteers who are willing to participate in this program, just to bring awareness to the food service program and drive our participation and our numbers up to 100,000. We're always looking for volunteers to join that Jerusalem challenge. I'm not sure how many persons know about it, but we will advertise it. We will find some way to get it out to the community and get participation into achieving and supporting our staff who has worked so hard throughout these months to accomplish that, in serving almost 100,000 meals in 3 months. I think that's it for me today. I want to continue to thank the stakeholders, the food pantry, who has been working alongside us to get the word out, pick up the pieces that we're not able to pick up and serve our families in the Brookline community. I think that's it for me. All right, thank you guys.
Great. So I know there are a lot of food. First of all, Sasha, you've done such an incredible job. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, my microphone went off. Thank you. Thank you. Question. I know there are a lot of questions about the food pantry and some of the other things. I was just looking through the memo that Cliff sent. You know, I don't know, Janet, or I'm not sure if Cliff is even still on, or Carla. I mean, if there are questions there about how that works, somebody had just mentioned one a couple minutes ago, and I'm trying to crosswalk what those questions might be, because Sasha really is sort of, you know, our expert on this.
Susan, I haven't had a chance to look at the memo myself. I would assume it's along the same lines as some of the other warrant articles we've had, where there is a desire for the town to spend more money helping the vulnerable by funding the food pantry, because there are more people accessing the food pantry now. Funding BHA to do things like the internet connectivity. I'm not sure I understand what your question is. I'm also not sure, based on what I've heard so far this year, that there's a mechanism for more funding to go to those places, because it can only be done in the form of a grant. So I have said before, the town itself is not wealthy. There are many wealthy people who live here, but the town does not have a bottomless pit of money. I've said it to you, not because I don't support what the schools are doing, but because that's reality. There's only so much to go around.
Okay, absolutely.
Susan, if I can offer, I just looked at the memo and sort of, and just based on what I know from what we pulled together from March and kind of all the coordination that Sasha talked about with all the local communities. There's what I'm looking at, some of it replaces some of the supports and services that the school department provided over the summer in terms of our storage space and refrigeration and freezer space, which the food pantry, I know at that time quadrupled their services and the need for storage and safe food storage space. So that has to do with the overall town response to the food pantry and family needs and individuals at all ages. Brookline Thrives is the only one I see on here of 108,000. And they're doing supplemental services and supports that are outside of and in conjunction with the food service program. While we are providing a significant number of meals, we're not providing all the meals that families with school-age children need. So that's a small portion, but the rest of the food pantry items and the appear to be sort of really sort of like, this is just from what I know. Nobody's talked to me. It's just I read this as a response to the ongoing operational on the ground supports that they need. And I know the school department has filled in a couple of these holes for them periodically. So it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I'll ask sort of a blunt question. This might not be the right way to ask it, so feel free to redirect it. But are there any of these things that are getting asked for to be pulled out of the reserve fund that there's a better way to get that money through, again, through the meals program, through what we know we can get, you know, what we know is available for free, that sort of thing? Like, are there other places to fund some of these requests, or through other places rather than the reserve fund? I think maybe that's a different way to ask it.
Yeah, I think that would be a question of what have they done to fund these from other sources. The question is, what is the town's permanent commitment to the food pantry? It's an independent organization. So what is the town's permanent commitment to funding community organizations such as these, and what does that mechanism look like? I don't know what how the housing authority sort of integrates with the town's budget, but that would be the question of
Right.
what
But
is
I
the
guess just
town's
my only
commitment?
other, yeah, and I guess I wasn't really asking the question of you of the town commitment, although I think
Yeah,
that's the right question to ask. My question for you was more, are there any of the items on here that you would sort of look at and say, why would we be going to the reserve fund to get it? We really should be going to X government program to get it and access the revenues that way. And maybe the food pantry can't do it, but the schools can do it. Like there's another way to
Yeah.
access money for some of these line items through us. I don't mean
Yeah, no,
anything
there's
there.
nothing, yeah,
Okay.
we can only provide, because we've investigated this since March. So the only thing that we can provide is sort of in-kind support and services. Like we can have them borrow our freezers, borrow our equipment, but we can't give it to them. We can give, and Sasha does do this periodically, is if we have overages in terms of food, we can actually give some of our USDA commodity foods to food pantries and the like. But in terms of us keeping our food costs down, Sasha's not over ordering either. So I don't see anything that we can support them with. We do it on a temporary, or this is really permanent up leveling that they need to respond to the long-term growth that they've had, as I see it, in my understanding of what they've been responding to. And I do want to say, sort of support, like the big support the school committee and school departments provided, as Sasha alluded to, is the number of meals we're providing, and the fact that free lunch is available for all students regardless of income. Plus we're doing additional meals for our low income students is a huge support. So we have already maxed that out for what supports we can give our low income families.
So I don't know if that answers, I don't know why my camera keeps going out. I don't know if that answers some of the questions that were raised earlier, but any thoughts or questions on food service in general? Okay. All right, Sasha, thank you. This is such
Wait,
an important...
sorry, I didn't unmute fast enough.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask Sasha, it was great to see, this is Mariah, it was great to see that the volume that you're getting now, as I interpreted your budget, that you're gonna meet your revolving fund, sort of, you'll balance out. I guess I was wondering if, because I've been hearing from parents that they're still struggling a little bit with some of the orders, and I liked the flow charts that you put out. I assume those are gonna get published and shared. I hadn't seen those before, but that was really helpful. For example, I didn't realize that you could do online ordering to pick up on the, like, for example, for cohort A, I didn't realize you could pick up on Tuesday afternoon. So knowing that that was an option was really helpful. I guess I was wondering if you're gonna, if we might see those numbers change a little bit more as we get maybe better buy-in and people understanding how the process is gonna work, or if your numbers already are planning for improved buy-in, so to speak. Improved usage, I guess is a better word.
I think as I also looked at, and one reason why we shift to separating the cohorts and giving it to kids on their way out is because we were projecting a decrease in numbers over the winter months when we had the mobile and remote pickups where families would have to drive or walk to one of the pickup sites to pick up. So we did take that into consideration. Now that we've moved it indoors, we've projected that that number will increase as more people have easier access to those meals because kids are taking it home. Most of the kids are on site and they can take it on their way out. And as we, so we may see an increase, and we're hoping to see an increase. We did have, we did project based on what we are seeing in, what we were seeing in September and October, and what we've seen in November. We had a snow day, which we could take a look at what would happen if it snowed, and I took those numbers into consideration as well. We may see a slight increase, but I don't expect that it's going to be a huge increase.
Okay, but those charts are going to get shared around to the community?
Yes, they are. They are published on our website, but I will send out communication and email to the community with those charts in as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, because those are very helpful, and I will try and share those on the Facebook group too with
Oh,
families.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you again. This is such an important service, as we know, unfortunately more important than ever. And so just really, really grateful for your skill and your ability to navigate the money piece and the nutrition piece and the operational piece and just everything, the management piece and legal piece. There are just so many different pieces of this that you are pulling together really beautifully, Sasha. So just thank you for your skill and expertise. Just really grateful.
Thanks. Bye.
Good. Okay. Mary Ellen, what else would you like to try to do? We also have, yeah, I know we're not going to do BACE. Yep. Do you want to talk at all about FY22, or do you want to move straight to grants and gifts? Revolving fund?
No, let's, we should do 22. The grants and those could get handled through a consent vote if you want to take them and do them quickly. They don't really require much conversation.
Why don't I do that? That's fine. Why don't I do the minutes, the acceptance of grants, the acceptance of gifts, and the establishment of the revolving funds? Are there any questions on any of those 4 items? Because if not, we can just take them together. All right, so I will move them. Suzanne, remind me, I only have David and Mariah, right, on this committee? You're not on this committee. Okay. All right, so I'll move it. Second?
Second.
Great. So all those in favor, David?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. All right, so let's go to 22, and that might be the last thing we have today.
All right. Let's see. For 22, I can share my screen. I think I can, I know Susan has a copy of these. Let me share this. How do we want to share this document? Let's see.
I mean, we have about 3 minutes left, so if Jim, you, or Mary Ellen just wants to give us kind of your overview, let me just share how you're thinking about it.
Let me do this. Let me share my screen and sort of show the top third of this document, and then we'll share it out after the meeting to everybody. Can you see my screen? It says budget assumptions.
It's super little. Can you zoom in?
Oh, you can make it larger, yes.
But yes, we can see it.
Is that better? A little larger? Larger, Jim?
Yeah, a little bit larger.
A little larger, yeah.
Yeah, and then go ahead. Yeah, great.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, because I can make it larger still, so.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I did put that in the folder.
Oh, great, thank you. So this piece here, Jim and I have been working on budget assumptions for 22. And we are, our standard really is minimizing reliance on one-time revenue. Grant revolving funds are to be projected and be in balance for the future year. We need to review those earlier rather than later, partially so that as the grants have been level funded, the FTEs and staff charged to those grants and revolving funds are not, the revenue is not keeping up with those expenses. And so do we, for a grant, do we need to move that person into the operating budget as part of our 22 budget assumption, or do we eliminate the position? Are the services and supports for the grants different, that we don't need that individual? So those kind of questions need to be answered early on. Continue to advocate with Town School Partnership for the funds adequate to fund our schools. As committee members may be aware, we need, in a normal year, we need anywhere between 5 and 6% to advance our collective bargaining agreements. That is for steps, lanes, and a cost of living adjustment on the salary tables and for non-aligned. And so we need to continue advocating for those resources. So where we've come in terms of expenses is obviously continuing to seek efficiencies and sustainability. Personnel is kind of an assumption of funding for contracts, class size. I have source as a question mark. Are we, and this gets to enrollment, is how are we going to be budgeting for staff for our grade levels? This question seems to be coming up quite a bit. So I'm trying to identify the sources where these pieces and parts have come from. They come from a number of different places, a number of different committee meetings. Continue to fund the reserve where every year we put 4 FTE in the budget for special education, and we also fund grant and revolving fund expense gaps, if any. Ideally, we want to know those in February. We don't want to know those in September and October, which has been our longstanding experience. The expense budgets is sort of first priority is increasing contracts that we have for transportation, out of district tuition, software licenses. There's been a huge expansion in our licenses. So some of that has been shifting dollars. Robin, if you could mute Cliff, that would be great.
I have to raise the seat.
We also have lease renewals for technology that's computer hardware. We need to replace peripherals and equipment, and making sure that that is continuing and ongoing. Continue funding our new math curriculum materials. Will be in year 3 of a 3-year purchase for a 6-year contract on implementing the new math curriculum. Looking at special education contract service renewals. These have to do with compensatory services and other services and supports for IEPs. And then also continuing to fund professional development and student supports for equity, parity, and access to curriculum. So some examples of that is restorative justice, MSAN, ADL, the middle school ADL program that we were doing. And then also funding and being sure we continue to fund a $75,000 reserve fund for tuitions and contracted services for special education. And then the big question for us is, how do we budget for next year? Kind of alluded to already, David talked about is, what are the delivery options? We have 3 educational delivery options and an additional school. Do we continue the remote learning academy as a 9th elementary school? Do we assume in school attendance and budget a reserve for if we have to go to remote and have distancing? What's the direction of how we want to budget, and sort of what service delivery method do we want to go through or have next year? We did, and part of this document is also to update enrollment. Some of these are getting updated. So in terms of looking where we are for kindergarten, so do we budget where we were going to be for as part of the 21-22 projected enrollment projection based on our last report? Do we budget those students, or do we budget according to what our October 1 is, and then again budget some sort of reserve for additional teachers and sections if we have students returning? So we are looking at what enrollments are. So I think I'm going to stop there because the rest of it kind of gets into some staffing ratios. One of the pieces I have asked budget managers to be prepped for or prepare for is to come up with a per pupil allocation for their expense budgets, primarily so that we can redistribute some of those resources to the building base level as the building populations have shifted and changed, and equalize those dollars on a per pupil basis. And then if we have an enrollment increase, we can budget a pool of resources based on enrollment increase. So as a school gets more students, we would be able to give them more resources based on each student that shows up. That's the only way I can currently think about a way to sort of have, make sure that every school and department has the resources they need on sort of a fair share, equitable basis. So with that, I'll stop there and see what people have a reaction to, because this is a lot to begin with. And what the service delivery model is that the school committee's considering is probably the biggest question. And then from there, and I think Jim probably would have something to add.
I do. I think I reviewed the budget assumptions going back a number of years. I reviewed the class size averages for the last 30 years. And for the K-8 schools, if you average them all out, you would find that the class sizes were averaging around 20, a little less than 20, is what the data shows. But on the guidelines, as I was reflecting on the guidelines regarding the situation that we're in and wanted to consider shrinking those guidelines down to a smaller, maybe more targeted sort of approach where, we all want everything. But if we can target our guidelines a little bit more, for example, we need to meet contractual obligations. And that has to be in the budget. Those contractual obligations have to do with collective bargaining. They have to do with contracted services, transportation, technology. We have leases. We have special education, out-of-district placements. So those have to be in the budget. We have to fund those. But then on the other guidelines, as I look through, and maybe I'm just doing bigger picture, but I would say that one of the guidelines, I keep hearing about the sustainable growth model, which I'm going to need to know a little bit more about in terms of how that relates to the budget. But we need to align the budget to our program needs and what's happening currently. For example, the math review and the implementation of the math program. We should fund that. We have to adhere to class size guidelines that are, they're not really memorialized in hard numbers, but there's a range. And so if we adhere to class size guidelines, that'd be very helpful in terms of developing the budget. In terms of breadth of program, it would seem to me we should budget to maintain a breadth of program that's fine in performing arts, social emotional learning, physical education, world languages. We want to develop a budget that maintains those programs. Some of the other information around budget guidelines that I saw are really process oriented. For example, inclusionary approach, getting input from appropriate, having principals have input, having coordinators have input. School councils are supposed to weigh in on the budget. So that's a process piece that we need to make sure that we have in place. But I think if one of the budget guidelines, I think is also, I mean, I'm looking at the sustainable budget growth, and I think there are two things. So let me just say this. It's my obligation to present to the school committee a budget that when I say I mean the leadership team and the program people believe meets the needs of the students. That's my obligation. And the school committee obviously has an obligation to support a budget that they believe meets the needs of the students in the district. At the same time, we have to look at the resources that are available and make decisions that allow us to meet the important need of meeting needs of the students, but we have to be fiscally responsible in doing that. So if we can set up budget guidelines that are very clear about what are our highest priorities, seems to me class size is a high priority, breadth of program is a high priority, meeting our contractual obligations is a high priority, and also paying attention to and funding the efforts around equity, diversity, and inclusion in the district. I think some of the more, I don't know if they're esoteric or lofty goals, we may have to say, what do we really want this budget to reflect? Because at this point, the budget is a reflection of our values. And so what do we really want this budget to reflect? We'll have this conversation tonight at the table. We want to get something to react to. But you know, it's really going to be a matter of when we have to make difficult decisions. It's not going to be easy in any circumstances, but it's going to be less difficult if we adhere to budget guidelines that make sense. We have to meet contractual guidelines. That's no question about that. So that's going to be in the budget. We want to maintain breadth of program. We know we're not going to eliminate, you know, world language because it's less expensive. We're not going to eliminate it because the budget guideline says we're going to maintain breadth of program. But if we can narrow those budget guidelines to the essence of what it's going to mean to maintain the quality of the Brookline Public Schools, then we got to be a little bit more targeted in how we develop the budget. So it's not trying to please all things for all people across the whole spectrum. It's much more, what do we need right now to maintain the quality of these schools at the highest level that we can have, and how do we support that and fund that? So we're not sitting here in October scratching our heads saying, oh my God, we developed a budget, but we know we can't live by it. This has to be a budget that we can live by. So that would be my advice on this. And in some ways, it's going to be a iterative process in the sense that having discussions as we begin to develop the budget, where the school committee is likely to say, because in the end, this is the school committee's budget, so the school committee is going to have a lot to say about when we bring forth some recommendations for preliminary budgets, to ask questions and send us back to do more work on A, B, and C. That's all part of the process. But the budget guidelines are extremely important to provide the kind of, it's not just guidance, but to provide the guardrails, the philosophical foundation and the values of what we're trying to accomplish. Because it's going to be, I'm anticipating a budget season that is going to require that we're very transparent, we're very open, we're very clear. But the only way we can do that is to have guidelines that help us focus on what's most important in the district right now. So sort of those are my thoughts on this right now.
Right. Very, very, very helpful. And I'll say it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. We're just so grateful to have you, having seen so many budget seasons in so many districts from so many vantage points. It's just it's a gift to us, Jim. So thank you for that. Those hard-won stars, we can see them. So how's this? In terms of, if there are questions now, we should take them, but I also am mindful that we're a little bit over. I would also say that maybe tonight, Robin, we leave the budget calendar as a first reading. Maybe for the guidelines, Jim, you just want to say again, essentially what you just said, which might not be presenting these guidelines for a first reading, but just to have the document, but then your remarks to kind of overlay it, and then we can kind of go from there. Does that make more sense to you?
I love that. I think that makes great sense.
Okay. Great. Any comments at this point? And then, yeah, Suzanne, please.
Yeah, I just, just to remind us that we do have a vision, a mission statement, and we have goals, and perhaps we should take a look at those as we listen to Jim in terms of setting our budget guidelines. And perhaps those need to be changed, I don't know, but those also are guiding points for us, our mission statement and our goals for the year. And again, they can change, but there's something to start with.
Great. So if there's a particular document you have in mind, Robin, if we can get that into the Google Drive for tonight, that would be great.
And Susan, just on the calendar, as always, that's going to be subject to change, and it's also based on a typical year. So I think it's information at this point in terms of, our big deadline dates are February for the town administrators, balanced budget, and then town meeting. So I think there's some, I think what I would like, I guess there needs to be some revisions probably to it. So I just want to sort of make sure that people are aware of that, and so if that's going to require some
That's
time,
fine.
we
No,
can do
that's
that.
fine. No, yeah, that's fine. And, I mean, I think this group should do those revisions. I guess maybe it's not ready for a first reading. Why don't you just talk us through the big dates tonight? And then, because this budget calendar is always sort of an aspirational document. We've never once in 13 years of mine being on the school committee hit all these deadlines. So to my mind, I think it gives a flow and a sequence. I mean, maybe Jim has a better record and it speaks to me, but it's an aspirational document. It's a flow and a sequence. And I think there are probably a couple big deadlines on there that are important. And maybe we just highlight those, but we've never passed this document as something that is, down to the letter, because then we would be changing it every 2 weeks. We'd have to revote it every 2 weeks. So that's not what the vote is anyway. So I think maybe just why don't you talk us through the calendar tonight, and then I'll try to create a vote that makes some sense. How's that?
Okay, great.
Does that sound okay? I mean, this year in particular is like such, and I've said this with many other institutions. I'm not sure if I've said it here, but in terms of planning for 22, so much of what happens in 22 is not going to be known until we're in, at least 2/3 of the way through 21, because a lot of things are going to be, certainly those guiding principles can't change. But in terms of like, are we going to keep an RLA or aren't we? Well, I don't know. Are we going to have a vaccine? I mean, so I'm mindful, respectful, skeptical that we're going to, get something that is nailed down by February. I think it's never really possible. It's not going to be possible now, but I do think that we need that directional set of priorities and that directional, sense of like, okay, here are the chunks and here's what we need to learn in order to make this decision. So that people at least have a sense of like what that process is going to look like, as opposed to saying we're going to have a number in February that we're going to try to stick to. It's going to be more of a process in a quickly changing environment, and an approach and a set of what do we need to believe, what do we need to believe to get to this versus that, and what the dependencies are and interdependencies. So I think that's more how I would envision this, just from a realistic point of view. Yeah, Janet, please.
I just want to urge you, I was so heartened to listen to Dr. Marini, because that is the only way you can do a budget. I speak as someone who did it for too many years. But to urge you to make those guidelines as concrete as possible, because lofty goals will allow you to sneak everything under the rug, and then you would have emotional discussions, which seems to be where town meeting is going. So, some of the things that Dr. Marini laid out, you have to pay your staff. Your class sizes are, in my mind, much more realistic than where they were when I first became part of town government. And it's not something you can easily give on. And you have so many things that you're not going to know because of COVID. But be as concrete as you can and thrash them out at the concrete level, which may save you a lot of agony going forward. And good luck.
I like how you say good luck as though you're like not going to be in all these meetings, but that was really nice, Janet.
Well, I won't be at the school committee. I can sit in on these, but I find the larger committees exceed my bandwidth and I freeze so much, I just don't bother.
We feel like that too. So anyway, thank you. Very, very good words. That's appreciated. Okay, then we will wrap up for now. Jim, any final closing remarks for us? I mean, you just gave us your closing remarks, but anything else, or are we in good shape?
I'm appreciative for all the comments, and our work is clearly cut out for us now. This is going to be the lion's share of our effort right now, and so we're going to get to it right now. I'm going to call Mel. I'm going to meet with Mary Ellen, and we'll be prepared for this discussion tonight at the table. And I love the way it's been laid out there. Let's have the discussion, and let's zero really in on it. Not just come with the document to say these are our guidelines, but let's have the conversation, and then let's memorialize it for everybody to know that this is how we're going to approach this. All right.
And I just have to remind everybody that today is the last first day of school. Our last group of 10th through 12th graders is having their first day of school. It's November 12th, but it happened. And so I just, as though it doesn't, we're not in the middle of November, it is still the first day of school for some kids. So anyway, just we have to keep reminding ourselves of how many first days of school we've had.
It's almost emotional. I know. Very good.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Talk to you later. Okay, Mary Ellen, I'll be with you in a second.